Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. I'm your host, Max Kozlowski, and today I am honored to have Alan Kramer as my guest. Alan Kramer is the Executive Vice President and Commercial Bank Manager at the Bank of San Antonio. He has a wide range of experience working with both larger and smaller banks. He has been an advocate for businesses all over Texas, small, medium, and large, I would say. And Alan loves to work with the community. He is part of several boards, nonprofits. I'm going to let him talk about some of his favorite ones in just a second. But my favorite one is he's the chair of the Mind Science Foundation. And understanding the human mind and its potential is, as you guys know, one of my favorite things to do. And Alan is putting a strong charge in that front. And most important to know about Alan, I mean, a lot of you viewing this have already had a chance to interact with him. He cares about people knowing what they are doing when it comes to their finances, to their business growth, to their success. And he's just someone that everyone just feels comfortable speaking to, getting advice, getting help and support. And I am so happy to have you here. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and quite the intro. So I'll see if I can live up to it.
Well, you do it every day, so I appreciate it. So Alan, to get us kind of started here today, what is something really good that has happened in your world in the last 6 months or so? Something you'd like to share with us?
Wow. Well, you had mentioned it, so I'm going to jump on that. The Mind Science Foundation. We just finished out our pitch competition, and we, in essence, raised almost $80,000 to give to startup scientists doing groundbreaking research on neuroscience and the human brain. And we did that here in San Antonio. And it was an incredible experience because COVID had really set us back and we weren't able to really interact with the scientists. And so it was just a wonderful group effort to pull that off. And again, that happened just in October. So it was fresh off the heels of COVID, and we were able to pull it off. So it was a great accomplishment.
So one of the fascinating things to me is how we're doing things in San Antonio that not enough people know about. Yeah. We are keeping up with the likes of Austin or Silicon Valley or New York or Boston, and I've heard a lot from you the importance of being cutting edge, being ahead of the curve, pushing things forward. And this organization is a great example of that. So what is it about it that connects so much with who you are and
Sure.
what you're interested in?
Well, I mean, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's really kind of pushing the envelope of where we are in our understanding of who we are as a species, as people, what makes us different. And I agree with you. Tom Slick was the original individual who founded the Mind Science Foundation. And for those San Antonians and others who know about him, he was a oil man who started the Southwest Research Foundation, the Texas Research Foundation, many years ago with those proceeds. And he understood the value of continuing to research and scientific inquiry, and always asking why and what can we do differently. And I think mind science is just the extension of that as it comes to the mind, which is an explosive field right now. Mind science is taking off with the invention of the MRI, our understanding of synapses. We are really gaining a great new understanding of how we think, why we think the way we think, and how we can affect our thinking moving forward, which of course, I think marries perfectly with business. I think we want to understand why our customers interact with us the way we do. And I think it's just a natural extension of what I do every day with my business owners. So for me, it's an exciting way to kind of marry both parts of what I do.
Yes, absolutely. So and it connects well with our subject, right? If you're going to be working with and leading people, you better know how they think and act and what drives them. So Alan, when did you first start learning about leadership? I know I've had a chance to talk to you about your sporting career, your business career, lots of different places that you've learned about leadership, but I've never really asked you where did it all start? Where did you first become aware of this concept of leadership?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so for me, it's actually a pretty, I would consider to be traditional answer, in the sense that for me, being from a military family, military leadership and the idea of being an officer, a leader of, in this instance, men for the most part, was always something that was fascinating to me. I had multiple generations prior to mine who were officers in the military, multiple services. So those heroic and larger than life examples of leadership have always been kind of top of mind. And so I think truly, if I go back to my roots, that's where I really started thinking about or bringing in concepts of leadership into the way I viewed the world.
So, how do you view the world, right? What is your mindset or philosophy in regards to leadership, working with people, leading others?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first off, and again, you'll find out as we continue the conversation, I think why this is so important to me, but I try to marry pop culture and cultural references into my examples all the time with my team and with the groups I lead. So I'm going to start off with one. And for fans of the Marvel universe, it goes back to Spider-Man with with great with great skills and great strength and powers comes great responsibility. And I think honestly, that's what I've always been imbued with, and that's my philosophy. I think when you are given the opportunity, be it as a superhero who has great powers, or if it's a individual with long familial assets and history and support, that means that we have an obligation to take leadership positions within our communities, our companies, the organizations that support those entities. And we have that obligation to push those organizations forward and make them better. And so I think that marries really well into kind of this concept of what an officer in a military does. All right. He or she is responsible for pushing the unit forward towards a goal, whatever that goal may be. And since I am not in the military, I think I've channeled that into other venues and other ways.
So a lot of that desire, almost need, it seems to be a leader, kind of comes from within, right? Knowing that you've got something to offer to this world, and it can't go to waste. It
Yeah.
it almost feel like you again. It's this sense of obligation, of purpose, of being here.
Yeah.
So how do you do leadership, right? So thinking about practicality, how are some ways that you use this mindset of it being kind of like an obligation to help others and to serve others? How do you utilize it? How do you show it? How would people, that are
Yeah.
watching this podcast, what can they take and say, wow, I can do these things too?
So I think for me, as you indicated, and I like the term, others have used it as the idea of servant leadership, right? Which is, I think, first, as a potential leader, you have to understand your job is not to necessarily be the face of an organization. Your job is to serve the unit, the team, the organization that you are participating and leading. And that servant leadership mindset is first very important to establish, because our ego and many leaders' egos get in the way of accomplishing the ultimate goal that they are seeking. And so if you just acknowledge that servant leadership role is where you want to go, I think you can basically get there. But that doesn't mean, and as you said, if I wanted to talk about putting in action, That doesn't mean that you can't then take the flag for the organization and run up the hill and lead by example. So for me, I would say the combination of being a servant leader who leads by example is the ideal form of leadership. And I think that's applicable for a sports team, because if you're wanting to be the person who does the most reps, works harder, practices, et cetera, or a business organization or a nonprofit, that will be applicable in whatever organizational role you're playing or working with. And that servant leadership who leads by example would be kind of my framework and initial kind of tools or mindset to start the process.
So recognize that you are a leader, that you have an obligation, that you have to set the example, that you're here to help and serve others. And then you lead by example by doing it, and by doing it first. That's kind of what I'm hearing. So one of the things that I know about you and others that know you probably recognize is that you seem to be very patient with people, and tend to listen to them. Tell me a little bit about that. How do you consider yourself a patient person? And how have you developed this ability to kind of sit back and really listen to what people are saying before speaking and before, telling people what to do?
Well, I think it's a learned trait, and I think it takes practice. I appreciate your kind words, but for some individuals who do know me, that patience would not be the first adjective they chose to describe me.
I think I have to interject here, right? Family, close family members are not to be included in this, because I don't think anyone here or watching this podcast would say that their family members would think that they have a lot of patience. But
agreed.
We present ourselves in a slightly different ways to the world and
sure
inside our homes. But
I think you're right, though. But I think being thoughtful about being a listener is exceedingly important. Again, if you're not listening to your team, if you're not listening to the individuals that you're working with, the organization, to understand how they are viewing whatever the challenge is, whatever the goal that you're trying to achieve. If you're not understanding that, then again, using this kind of military analogy, you can grab the flag and run up the hill, but no one may be following you. And so you have to be patient to listen and understand where they're coming from, because that's crucial to getting people to follow you and move towards whatever goal you're looking to. And so I think it takes practice. And sometimes I've used the analogy, and some people talk about it in sales, the concept of the pregnant pause, meaning you put forward whatever the proposal is, or you ask a question, and then you just stop talking. Well, I would say that we don't do that enough as leaders when we're asking our team members about their opinions. And so I've thought of and visualized this concept of a semicolon. And the idea is, if you just visualize that this would be a good time to insert a semicolon or a pause, even if it's a few seconds, it's a very powerful tool that enables you to stop talking and think about what you just heard and then respond.
It is great advice, right? Like, talk about something that is practical that we can all go to and do a better job of. One of the things that I've recognized is we have a hard time of being in silence, right? Having a conversation and just pausing and giving people time to think and process. We expect instant responses, instant processing, and we getting uncomfortable when then we're that space. And what you're proposing is make that space. Take the time, take the extra couple of seconds to really listen and to give people that opportunity to really say and speak their mind, versus jumping right in with the very next question or thought.
And I would take it one step further, which is to even state that in many cases, you not only have to listen, but you literally have to what they're saying, but in some cases, you have to listen to what they're not saying as well. And for those who love literature and plays, I mean, there's a slew of our favorite authors and writers, from Steinbeck to Horton Foote to tons of others, and the magic that they bring to the literature and their character development is not the dialogue, but rather the understanding that we gain about those characters through what they're not saying and the silent expressions that they're making. And I would state that our teammates and our compatriots all are sending us signals without saying anything. And if you're not cued into that and you're not focused on picking those up, you're missing a lot of opportunity to really serve your team or your organization better.
Wow, what a concept, right? Listening to what is not being said, not just to what is being said. Does this include, like, for example, looking at nonverbal communication, or does it go beyond the nonverbal communication? Kind of like really analyzing, they didn't talk about this, they didn't say that, what could be going on in their world?
I think it's a combination, Max. I think the challenge with Zoom and of course phone conversations and emails is we are missing that. And I think if you get the opportunity, which I would always suggest is the best opportunity to sit across the table from somebody, then it's the nonverbal cues. Yes, I mean the old analogy, or the if someone's crossing their hands at you when they're sitting down, they're not open to what you're suggesting. If they're staring off in the distance, they're not really paying attention. Those are all nonverbal cues. But depending on the situation, if they're avoiding referencing some aspect of the conversation, or you see them kind of avoiding the mention of some part of the evaluation process, then that's probably telling you there's a reason they're avoiding that. I mean, they don't want to focus on it. And you need to explore that. You need to truly kind of dig a little deeper and ask some questions that kind of force the issue if it's important to you.
So it's recognizing that there's a subject that is not on the table that should be on the table, recognizing nonverbals, which is a skill in itself. But then there's this other skill, which I think might be even more challenging. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on how to overcome this, which is exactly kind of what you're talking about. When you recognize that there's an elephant in the room and they're not wanting to address it, but then you are brave enough to make space for it and bring it forth. And what's your insight on why people avoid that in the first place? And second, how do you bring it to the forefront and make it safe to have a conversation on something that is, scary to people?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna piggyback on what you said, is the idea of being scary and then safe. And I think in answer to your question, I think ultimately people fear failure, fear embarrassment, fear that they're not going to sound like they know what they're talking about. So rather than risk that fear being exposed, they avoid. And so you need to create a safe space for those conversations to occur. And so you have to be reassuring to your organization. You need to be reassuring to the individuals that work for you or with you that failure is okay. And in some cases, I would even argue failure is actually the best tool for learning how to do things better. And it's okay to fail. And we are creating a safe environment where we can explore these things together. And that basic safe space will allow us to create the best ideas for the organization's success.
So going right at the core of the problem, which is people are fear, right? Loss of love, loss of recognition, loss of job, whatever it might be.
Exactly.
And you go right at it. You go right at it and say, don't worry about that, right? And what is important here is to learn and to grow and to get better. So avoiding these difficult conversations, we're taking the risks, it is not worth it, right? It is more worth it to actually step forth with that. So I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, so I think though that the challenge, depending on the relationship that you're working with or organization is that doesn't happen instantaneously. That is, you need to, as a leader, help create that culture of acceptance. And that is a constant process. I mean, just saying, which again, we're going to have a brainstorming session today and all ideas are safe. Well, if you haven't expressed that the previous 10 meetings, and you have potentially, and hopefully not, but potentially ostracized someone for an idea they brought forward, no matter if you, as you said, attack the issue at hand and just make a broad statement, that's not going to be acceptable. You really create a culture of acceptance and making sure that they have a, as we kind of say, is like a safety net underneath them. They have to really believe and see that net consistently before they're really willing to try the really difficult acrobatic exercises, right, that we want them to achieve. And so it's a constant process.
So there's no such thing as, and I'm with you, right? We sometimes kind of take to I don't know, popular concepts or ideas or even pop culture, right? You go to a workshop or seminar, you do some trust falls, and then everybody loves each other and trusts each other, and that's just not how things work. You've got to be building it, improving it time and time again, which takes me to another great conversation, because sometimes we as humans believe that there's a trick, right? Hey, if you just do this, everything that falls into place and you're done. And what you're re-emphasizing here is that it's a consistent, continuous practice and continuously creating that environment. So what are some ways that you create that environment for your team to then be able to?
Yeah, so I think, so I'm just going to piggyback on another. So I'm a big believer in the routine, in the practice. We just saw the Olympics, and clearly, right, those individuals, did hours and thousands of hours of repetition to get to that level of excellence. And I think in a business or a organizational process, you have to commit to the same concepts of routine and creating a well-established sense of that culture that you want. So for example, you asked, what's something that I do to help provide certainty to my team? And every time that we meet, they know what we're doing and why we're doing it, which I think is a beginning foundational step for creating a safe space. And so it's super simple. I never have a meeting without an agenda. And I make sure the agenda states what we're going to do, and I stick to the agenda, because what you're doing is you're creating a level of trust and comfort that you as a leader value their time. You as a leader are acknowledging the importance of their contributions by their time, and that you want to adhere to a basic step-by-step process to get to whatever you're trying to get to. And again, it doesn't have to be some exhaustive agenda, but the existence of the agenda every time, all the time, is a routine. And then they begin relying on that and trusting that you will have put some thought into whatever you're working on. So I think that's something that in business, I think we don't do enough of. And that extra prep that you do as a leader in creating the agenda will actually help you in two ways. One, creating the sense of certainty that we talked about. But then secondly, it's forcing you in a way, kind of going back to that semicolon, to take a pause out of all the other distractions and spend, even if it's a few minutes, focusing on what you as a leader want to get out of this meeting, which will help make your meetings better. And so it's just a good circle and a very small first step. And if you do it all the time, I think good results happen.
Wow, that is another chunk of really good practical advice. And I think it connects a lot of the dots, because you're saying you're here to serve. And if you want people to be engaged and give you their best, then you've got to first be engaged and give them your best, which means you prepare for that meeting and you put thought and energy into an agenda.
Yep.
So when they show up, you've done your part, and now you can devote more of your time and energy to them.
Correct.
You're building discipline, consistency, which also adds several layers of certainty, because people always know what to expect. And therefore, you're presenting another great example of, if you know what to expect from me, now you understand that you've got to be able to do the same for me. I need to be able to know what to expect from you. So you kind of build the framework for the relationship and the type of relationship that you're trying to have with them.
So if I could build on that, I love that your term of expectations, because I think that's critical to also creating that trust environment, which again allows everyone to acknowledge their fears, but setting those expectations, no matter the situation, is huge. So if as a board, let's just say in the nonprofit world, the boards that I have served on and seen where we actually have a board expectation agreement work so much more effectively than those boards that we don't have that document or conversation upfront. Because now there's concern about what I'm supposed to do, and is it written, is it not? Same thing with, I think, our teams in business, and is to set those expectations upfront, no matter the circumstance. If it's, I think we all have this concept of reviews and quarterly performance expectations, but it goes further than that. It's the very simple conversation of, hey, I expect that today, during our meeting with this client, that you will be able to provide some feedback on XYZ. And if you just set that expectation up front, then when he or she executes, then you have the opportunity to evaluate it, learn from it, and then move forward. But if you don't set the expectation up front, your feedback loop is much harder to be accepted by them, because they're going to be very defensive at the beginning. But if you set the expectations up front, it helps.
I love that idea. I see one of the biggest mistakes happening in relation to what you just talked about, which is we just assume, right? We assume that everybody else is in sync with our thoughts or with our ideas or with our expectations. And then when they don't deliver on our expectations, we're wondering what happened, until we realize that, well, our assumptions are not everybody else's assumptions. So you're saying, look, put the ego to the side, put some thought on what you're trying to get, and communicate it, right? Most of the world's problems are lack of communication, and setting expectations is one of the ways to help avoid that. So you've shared lots of very practical advice for our audience. We're going to put together a little summary of Alan Kramer's top tips and advice, and you're going to be able to download it, practicalleadership.com. That's practicalleadership.com with one L. You can head that way, watch some of the other podcasts, download some of the templates and tools that our leaders are providing for you guys. I want to see how far I can push this, Alan, and ask you about, is there a particular tool, template, system, process that you love to use that has proven very effective for you that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Sure. So beyond, I think, what we've already expressed, right, which is the pre-planning and the agendas and clear expectations, something that I've very frequently used that enables me to connect to teams and enables me to validate my ability to kind of see things in a different way, which help communicate what we're trying to accomplish, is my consistent use of current and cultural references to make a point. Now, we haven't done that a lot today, which is fine, but typically, I would be pulling from a book that I've read or a radio show that I've heard or a TV show. And I would literally, in those kind of examples that I want to talk about in reference to a process change, or I'll bring those in. And I know it sounds almost kind of intuitive, but to be deliberate and do that frequently enables me to do a few things. It enables me to consistently research and look for new ways to connect to my team and my audience. It enables me to kind of keep my mind always open to new inputs. And so for me, it helps me because I'm watching Ozark and I'm thinking about situations and how they apply to the bank, or I'm reading a book and thinking in my mind while reading it, wow, that relationship that this particular character has with such and such is very similar to this problem we're having at work with this client. And so when I bring up those examples to my team members, and as a group setting or a one-on-one, it just kind of helps reinforce to them that I'm always trying to get new bits of information. And I think by example shows them that we need to be always open to new forms and new ways of solving problems. And that, additionally, it also probably helps me highlight what I'm trying to say to a different group, because sometimes I think if you're always using sport analogies as an example, which is a very common practice, as you know, in business, yet half of my workforce never played organized sports, I'm not connecting with half my workforce. Likewise, if I'm only talking about sci-fi movies, yet I have a group of individuals who don't like sci-fi movies, those references are lost. And so I'm always trying to bring in different ways of connecting. And as I said, I think it's a tool that I use is I literally, and I know it's a little odd, but I'll watch a movie and I'll think about, before I kind of let the movie go, of how I could use something from that movie in another aspect of my life. And that's kind of the tool that I use. And I may or may not add that to my repertoire, but that's what I do every time. And every time I finish a book, I think of, wow, that's a great book. What can I take from this book and apply somewhere else?
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you for an example here in just a second.
Yeah, I knew you were.
But here's all the cool things that I'm getting, right? So engage and connect with people through current events, pop culture, movies, television, literature, etc. So you make it something that they care about, and you bring in the teaching and the learning and make it applicable through analogy.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Through analogy, because we I think as humans, going back to our discussion, we don't just absorb information in one way, right? We like to visualize, we like to get auditory stimulation, all of these things. And so by creating different ways of connecting the brain to the example that we're making, just helps reinforce that concept. So
excellent. Yeah, here you go with our example, right?
Okay, so pick, and it's almost kind of like if you so here's kind of a game you can play. All right. Now we don't have to do that today but if you ever remember the Kevin Bacon game, are you familiar with the Kevin Bacon game?
Is that the one where he knows everyone and is connected
Correct.
to everyone? Yeah.
So you have to go back and connect to Kevin Bacon, and you have to try to do it through different movies. So imagine that you're trying to do something similar and you can pick it. You would pick an example. You would say, for example, I want to basically understand how to show my team, right, the value of consistency and never giving up, right? And so you would say, okay, well, let's think, how can I talk about, so Nathan Chen, right? He is recent Olympian, and he had horrible, I'm sorry, Andrew Chen, I'm sorry, is the Olympian. He had a horrible Olympics 4 years ago. And he was our figure skater. And they built him up, and he was doing amazing, he was going to be the next superstar. Quads, and right. Well, the pressure got to him. And he did just really, really poorly. I mean, even for his standards. And they once again then brought him forward, and he came forward and he wanted to go ahead and do this again. Well, he worked even harder than he did the previous years. He did not let that get him down. He went back to the ice rink 3 times as much as he had the previous Olympics. And he just did it again and again, and he wasn't going to give up. He didn't let that one setback stop him. And now, of course, he did. He got the gold medal. He had the best, I think, short program score in world history. And he has, done amazing things. So you try to find that example. And that's a sport example. So another example, if you're wanting to pick a character out of a movie, you can play this game and just think of, okay, well, where was there a story of someone who stayed true to their ideals, and even though it hurt in the short term, the long-term success was realized. I mean, there's a plethora of examples that you can pull from movies or books. And so even just kind of going through those mental exercises from time to time, while you're sitting down quietly and you have some downtime, kind of gets your brain as a leader thinking of how to bring those examples in. What I found, not only in my leadership role, but I mean, this is a little subtext of this, is through my interactions with my clients, I found this to be exceptionally helpful because I find ways of trying proactively to connect to my clients as well. And because my clients in this industry come from a variety of backgrounds, it's creating those connections that shows that you're listening to your clients and that you are kind of deeply understanding where they're coming from by providing examples. And the one that always seems to pop up for me, and again, my little plug for National Public Radio, since I'm on the board, is I can almost tell you without a doubt, every week I reference TPR. Oh, I heard an article about that or a radio show about that on TPR. And so when I'm going between my client calls or my meetings, if I'm in my truck, I listen to the radio and I pull these examples and start thinking about a client that I can actually reference them with later on. And it just keeps my brain active all the time.
Excellent. So you're consuming content with the purpose of repurposing it and communicating it back. So what I heard is the importance of being a good storyteller,
Yes.
and being in the lookout for great stories to tell that help you communicate your point, right? That help you get your point across because of all the positive things that it encompasses. So to help our audience even more, because I can just imagine some people sitting at home. It's like, yeah, I get it. I got to tell more stories. There's all these things that are going on. How do you know if your storytelling or your analogies are working, if they are connecting, if they're getting through to people? I'm going to give you an example of them not getting through to people, right?
Okay.
I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. But for example, if I go to my kids and I tell them, hey, back in my day, and here's my story, that doesn't tend to work very well,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
How do you how do you know if what you're talking about and what you're bringing to the table is connecting with your audience, which could be your clients or your team members?
So kind of it's reiterating two things we talked about before. One is it's the listening and watching for the body language and making sure they're engaged. I mean, when I tell a story, we're using your terminology. When I tell a story, I move through my audience. If it's a group, I don't just stare at one person in my group or team. While I'm telling the story, I'm constantly scanning and I'm looking for engagement. I'm looking for those cues. Are they staring at me? Are they looking at me? Are they checking their phone? Are they doing all these other things that give me those cues? And so if you're finding they're not, then you can insert things as such as, so yeah, like I was saying, Mary, when I did this and this and this and this, and that's okay to re-engage them, you know. But then the other thing is, like you have learned through practice, talking about your old stories, quote unquote, to your kids is not successful. I think practice also helps you become better because you will learn what is engaging. You'll learn through practice what's appropriate for the different audiences that you work on. Let me just give an example. If I'm sitting in a client's office who runs a business, let's just call it a manufacturer. Well, if I have a story that is similar, but it's about their competitor, I'm probably not going to tell that story because practice has shown me that that doesn't play well. But rather, if I have a story about something else that is comparable, then I think you can draw on that because people just don't resonate well. So practice, interpretation of what cues you're picking up, and then I think you become a better storyteller the more you do it.
Excellent. Last question on this subject, which is, how does it sound when it is working, right? Like, what's some of the feedback that you get from your audience that cues you into saying, "Yep, this is working. It's making sense."
I think more than sounds, it's the what does it look like? And again, it is just like you said, just right there. You just did it. It's the nodding of the head. It's the, oh yeah, I get that. It's the upward look of the eyes, meaning because when we're thinking, many of us have a natural inclination to kind of look up or cock our heads to the side. Those are physical cues that they're processing what you're saying. And when you get that, then I think you can kind of mentally note, okay, that's a good story. That was a good example. That one worked. The other one that I will tell you, which I've taken when it's not working, is when a client dismisses and moves on to another subject very quickly. So if you're telling a story based on some conversation about, fundraising, and somebody that you're talking to brings up something and changes the subject 90 degrees to something else, what you're picking up from that is that they weren't listening to you about fundraising. They were already thinking about this other topic that they thought was more important. And so the rapidity at which they respond and change the subject or concur with what you're saying is a cue about if it really sunk in or not.
One of the things that it makes me think about is when you're in a sales environment, mm-hmm. and you are presenting or pitching, having a conversation. And I almost call it like the different stages of sales mastery. When you're first starting and you don't know your content really well, right? Whatever that might be, whether it's your sales, your product, your business, or whatever, you're so focused on your inner world, you're so focused on your content, what you have to do, what you have to present, that you don't have the opportunity to do what you just mentioned.
Right.
Once you've mastered this content and it just kind of comes out naturally, it's part of who you are, it makes it a whole lot easier to do what Alan, you're referring to, right? Which is
Yeah.
being able to pay more attention to what's happening on and going on around you. So for those of you out there that are wanting to take Alan's advice, think about that there might be a stage that you need to get through first before you can really master those skills. Because if you think that your brain has to be able to multitask and gather all these inputs, because I have to look at all these visual cues and tell the story and talk business and talk my product, it could potentially be overwhelming. But if you recognize that you're in a stage where, look, I really need to focus on my pitch and presentation first, I might need someone else to help me look at the audience, right? Or I'm going to be paying attention to the audience while somebody else is pitching the product. So how do you work as a team to be able to deliver the goals and the outcomes? I think it's just something that I want the audience to recognize, that there could be phases of expertise development.
Well, and I would take it one step further and encourage the audience to think about, if we're focusing on that particular part of the process, I would also encourage people, as they're practicing these skills, to take some other tasks involving meetings and presentations and organizations off their plate. So case in point, I find if you can assign as a leader of a sales meeting or a client interaction or a nonprofit board, someone other than you to, for example, take notes, that is a huge weight off of your shoulders, because you now don't have to worry about capturing every detail. You can really focus on what the client is saying and then formulating that response, or pivoting in your content presentation to better align with their values or whatever that is. And so that's one example of saying, hey, Joe, you're my teammate here. Can you be my secretary and make sure and that way I, as the sales call leader or whatever, don't have to. That's a great example of those division of duties that really help the team move forward.
Excellent. So free up your RAM and leverage your team for all of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this has been super, super powerful. I've gotten so much out of this quick conversation. I want to go through some of the key points that you mentioned throughout our conversation. The podcast is Practical Leadership, and you really took it to heart, and you really gave some really good stuff, both mindset, philosophy, and very practical ideas. So I'm going to try to kind of get through some and summarize them. So first, I think the mindset has to do with being a servant, right? Servant leadership, and you're here to serve the unit. And it comes as an obligation because of your God-given gifts, abilities, capabilities, position in life. So you've got to step up and you got to do it. Make sure that the ego does not interfere. And it's not about you, but it really is about serving others. And the first way to do it is leading by example. So lead by example. You talked about this concept of the pregnant pause. Yeah. Which is ask a question and really stop talking, right? Make sure that there's that room for people to think, to process, and to communicate, and to say whatever they have to say. Mm-hmm. To add to that, you're also said, don't only listen to what they are saying, but pay attention to what they are not saying, yep, which could be even more valuable than what they are saying. And bring those difficult conversations to the forefront. So don't be afraid to bring those conversations to the forefront. And the only way you can achieve that is by making a safe space, right? You've got to develop a culture through consistency, through repetition, where people recognize that there is no failure, there is learning, and through the learning, you get better and better. So the last part to that kind of was this idea of discipline, right? If you want people to be engaged, you want people to give you their best, you've got to give them your best. And one of the ways that you do that is by preparing for the meetings up front, making sure that every meeting has an agenda, being thoughtful about what you need to cover and what you need to do, meaning it doesn't have to be a huge agenda, but it has to be very, very clear. So you give people a lot of transparency and clarity on what is going to be going on, which then connects with this idea of setting expectations and communicating with them consistently and being very, very, very clear about what you are expecting from them. I'm telling you, there was a lot of good stuff, Alan. That was a lot of good stuff. So align those expectations. Don't assume anything. Make sure you're communicating it. When you put all of that together, you've got an engaged team that trusts their leader, that's going to give you their best, and is willing to speak up and knows that they are being heard.
Yeah.
And your approach is make it fun, make it relatable, tell the stories, look for the stories.
Yeah.
And recognize that you've got to develop those skills, right? It took you time to develop those skills. Our audience needs to invest some time to develop their skills as well. Whew. Did I miss anything,
Wow.
Alan?
No, I was very impressed. So clearly you do not need to work on your listening. You are an excellent listener and very well done. And you didn't even have someone to take notes for you. So even better. So very well done, Max.
Well, thank you. You did a great job of going in there and explaining and giving us some examples. So it made it very, very easy for me to capture some of those ideas. So Alan, what is something that you're excited about or looking forward to here within the next few weeks or months that you'd like to talk about and share?
I will tell you, and I mean this as you know, and again, I hope this doesn't exclude some of your audience, but I am a San Antonian through and through. And I truly believe right now, San Antonio is moving in a great direction. And I know we have some challenges at the global level, at the national level. We're coming out of COVID, et cetera. But I have never seen as much positive economic energy in San Antonio. And I've been doing it for 20 plus years. And so I'm just excited what the future holds for our community. I think we've got a good group of business leaders who are investing in what we're doing. I think we've got some elected officials who want to find some good balance. There's a little conflict there, which isn't always bad. But in general, I think I'm really excited about what the rest of this year holds for San Antonio. I think there's going to be some announcements coming about some really big things, and it's going to be good for us.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for leading the community. Thank you for leading the innovation and the thinking, and for doing things that we would traditionally think are not for San Antonio, right? Like the Mind Science Foundation and fundraising and driving innovation in fields that are the future of our civilization. If you know, I'm not exaggerating in the sense that the more we understand about ourselves, the better we're going to be able to do out there. Any last words of wisdom? Any last thoughts?
No, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. And, you know, anytime you want me to talk with you and make me sound so smart, I'm happy to do it. You do that really well. So thank you for that, Max. I appreciate it.
Well, you've done a great job. So everyone, head out to practicalleadership.com, practicalleadership.com, only one L. You're going to get to download some of the notes from today's podcast, a template specially designed to use Alan Kramer's approach and philosophy to leadership. Make sure you subscribe, follow all the great things, and please share with me, who would you like me to interview in our podcast? Who's a great leader doing some great and amazing things that you think needs to be in this podcast? I'd love to connect with them and bring them to you. So with that said, thank you for joining us today, and goodbye for now. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.